Hello, everyone. My name is Katie, and I'm the host of the Creative Species podcast. Although I have an art degree and work at an art museum, I am still someone who has struggled with my relationship with creativity. I'm curious about how others, whether professionally or personally, have weaved creativity into their daily lives. So, this project is a series of interviews with people around me from all different disciplines that will share their story, aspirations, opinions, hot takes, and advice. So, here we go. Hello, today we have the Jean-Luc Delatorante on the pod. I've known Jean-Luc forever, like since middle school forever, and I've watched him grow so much. He's one of my favorite people to talk to, and he is incredibly insightful in this episode and has led such an exciting life, which you can tell when I read his bio right now. Jean-Luc Raymond de Laterante is a multimedia artist and maker with a primary focus in clothing and moving image art. He is motivated by the tension seen in day-to-day life, compelled by the beauty inherent in simplicity, and moved by the unconscious repetitions inherent in our lives. Using film and clothes as mediums to elicit radical change, they are interested in eliminating all binaries, working towards abolition, and using radical listening and connectivity to combat racism and transphobia in the entertainment industry. Jean-Luc has exhibited work at the 2019 Prague Quadrennial as part of the PQ Studio. He has worked as the costume department coordinator for Hulu's Fire Island, a fictional gay rom-com, and Netflix's Rustin, a biopic that examines the life of the gay civil rights activist Bayard Rustin. They were also the costume shopper for a Netflix feature film, The Deliverance. Recent costume design work includes the spring dance concert at the Fisher Center and an upcoming production of The Dance Floor, The Hospital Room, and The Kitchen Table, a new play about the contemporary impacts of HIV and AIDS, which will be performed at the Vauxhall in Baltimore. They are a graduate of the costume design program at Carnegie Mellon University. You can find him at Jean-Luc underscore Raymond on Instagram. That is JeanLuc underscore RAMOND. Here's Jean-Luc. Thanks for joining me today.
So glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, of course. When I think of creative people, you're always at the top of the list.
That's very kind of you to say.
So, first, can you tell us where you are right now?
Yes, I am currently rehearsing a show at Lehigh University. The show is called The Dance Floor, The Hospital Room, and The Kitchen Table. It is a new play, a new work about the AIDS crisis, and it takes a contemporary view and recordings that our team has done of people who survived the AIDS crisis and incorporates them into a new play.
And so I have to say that when I asked Jean-Luc to meet and we were talking about meeting tonight, and he said he was gonna join after work because Jean-Luc is also trying to be a nurse or working as a nurse assistant. And so he's made quite different pivots in his life. So the theater artist to nurse pipeline, kind of interesting. So I'd like to kind of just start from the beginning and ending where you are right now. But if you want to talk a little bit, just maybe about your childhood a little bit and how you got into the arts, because I feel like have done every single art form.
That's maybe an exaggeration, but I have done a lot of art forms. Well, the very beginning is that I was born, and then
Yep.
I was born backwards, so I feel that that explains a lot about me. Um, but no, I started probably first in dance, and that was sort of my gateway into the arts. I did that from like the age of 5 or 6 up until the end of high school. And I think through that, through seeing different people and getting to know different people, uh, I started to explore different avenues of like artistic expression. In fifth grade, we were tested for our instruments. So that's when I began playing the flute. Uh, but I had always had like a great love for music and I guess for art from the time that I can remember. It's always been a way for me to escape something that I talk a lot about in therapy is my desire build to build a world. And I think for me, art allows me to do that in a variety of different ways. And so, whether that's playing the flute or dancing, I've also, as you know, I was in high school a member of different choir ensembles, in addition to marching band and dance. And at the same time, in high school, began sort of dipping my toe. As I don't know that I even dipped my toe. I kind of just plunged right in to the theater world.
Yeah, because I don't really remember you doing a lot of, because we met in middle school,
Yeah,
and I don't remember you doing a lot of theater in middle school.
I didn't. I saw a lot of my friends, including you, doing it. And I think at the time I was like, oh, that's something that I could do. And so I remember our freshman year of high school, I auditioned for the, I think it was the fall musical, and we did Singing in the Rain. And I think being in that show just sort of changed everything for me. And I was like, oh, this is like the combination of all the things that I really love.
I know for me, the reason that I loved theater was because I was very shy. I felt like I had friends, but I guess I just wasn't very confident. And I feel like theater to play somebody else, or I don't know what it was. Like if you asked me to make a speech in front of a group of people, I couldn't do it. But if you wanted me to play a part that I could, and that's why I enjoyed it. I don't know if you've felt that certain way, or if you want to talk briefly about just the belonging that you had with that.
I think for me, what it always was this sense of community. And that's what still draws me to the arts. And I think drew me to the arts from day one was like, there is a special kind of bond that you have when you are creating something with someone else. And the collaboration and creativity that is sparked from the cohesion of two people's imaginations is something that is completely like unreproducible in other settings. And again, I talked about world building, right, outside of the world that we exist in. And I think that for me, in a lot of ways, the theater community was sort of escapism. Growing up as like a queer child, I think that also had a lot to do with it. I didn't have the words to express who I was. And so being able to be around people who inherently accepted me for who I was and being able to explore different iterations of myself through an artistic medium was actually very healing.
Agreed. And then you also mentioned, graduating high school. And like I said, I remember this very clearly because also you're the type of person that's good at everything. And I
I
know
am
you're going to deny that.
everything.
But but I mean, you were salutatorian of the class. Very smart. I feel like you could do a lot of things. And correct me if I'm wrong, you can explain this more, but I felt like you had this pressure to do something quote unquote like smart, like, and I think you said, I want to be a doctor or psychiatrist, or I remember you talking about architecture or something like that. And even starting at U of M, you took orgochem for fun or because you thought, or, you were going to do something else. So I guess one, two questions of why do you feel like the arts are seen as not as a smart career choice, and also what was the pivoting point for you to decide that's actually what you wanted to do with your life?
So this is a very complicated question, and I think it looks a little bit different for everybody. But for me, I think there's a really deep misunderstanding of what an artistic career looks like. And I don't think that the general public knows the variety of different avenues that are available within the arts because we're told from such a young age, that the only stable careers are careers in healthcare or careers in, you know, engineering or math or, any of the sciences. And it's just not true. You can make a career out of selling crayons if you want to. So it's really about what you not only what you feel passionate about, but what you feel like you want to do in the long term and the kind of lifestyle that you want to live. And that can look like a lot of different things, but capitalism tells us that it has to look like a single family home with two kids and a spouse.
And the pathway is just so like zigzag, right? I mean, and I talked about this a little bit when my mom was on the podcast because we were talking about how her career, my brother's career, there's an obvious pipeline of you go to school for this and then you obviously become this thing with that degree, where a lot of art degrees, they're very flexible. There's no natural next thing. There's contracts, there's contractual jobs, temporary jobs, projects, so it's just, it looks a lot different. And I think that looks very risky to a lot of people. It's not as common. I know for me, I'm trying to think of when I decide, like, yeah, I'm going to do art. I'm trying to think of like what that moment was for me. I think I just realized like I was always going to art minor and I just kept taking art classes. And then I feel like it got to my point, I think it was my sophomore year, my second semester, that I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. I keep taking these classes. I just, it's a reoccurring thing that keeps coming back to me. And I don't think I knew what I was going to do yet with my art degree, but I guess I just trusted the process.
So, to sort of continue on a little bit more about what you were saying in terms of what was the thing that sort of prompted me to say, oh, I'm going to do this as a career. I don't know that I don't know that I had a specific moment either. So I took a class my freshman year of undergrad. I was still undeclared. I thought I was going to do pre-med, as you sort of mentioned. And I knew I was interested in theater, and so I had to fulfill like a writing requirement, a freshman writing requirement, which most schools require. And the class that I took was a drama class, and it was through the residential college at the University of Michigan. And the class was taught by the most amazing professor who very tragically is no longer with us, Kate Mendeloff. She is essentially the person who became a very big mentor in my life, uh, especially at that age. And she was the one who kind of encouraged me in a lot of ways to pursue an artistic career. It took kind of many classes. I took several other classes with her over the course of my freshman and sophomore years before I decided that I was going to formally pursue a, Bachelor of Fine Arts, which ended up taking me, 3 more years after my sophomore year. So I took 5 years to graduate. But in the end, it was very much worth it. And in the middle of my sophomore year, I interviewed for the design and production program at the University of Michigan, and was accepted and started my classes that spring semester. So the spring semester of my sophomore year.
So I kind of remember you maybe being interested in performance. So when, and that's what you did also in high school, was performance. So when did you kind of switch to going to more of the behind the scenes stuff?
So it kind of came. So in the drama class that I took with Kate Mendeloff, you had to do a little bit of everything. You had to uh, we had to write a original play. We had to, which was what fulfilled the writing requirement. We had to act out scenes. We had to design the costumes. We had to, do a scenic design, and we had to do dramaturgy. It was sort of like an introduction to drama as a whole. And in that class, I sort of realized that I actually prefer being behind the scenes. Like, I love, I still enjoy performing, but it always gave me so much anxiety. And I learned that, like, for me, the way, the best way into the world, so to sort of build a world, was through um, the scenography. And I didn't know at the time that I was going to pursue specifically costumes, but that's what it became.
So then why costumes? Because as far as design goes, I mean, that could be set, that could be,
For sure.
lighting.
I think that there is a there's an interesting pipeline between performance, dance, and the relationship to the body. And so people who perform, specifically dancers, have a, I think, much better understanding of their body than many other people. And I think from that, I sort of developed this inherent interest in clothes and the way that clothes adorn the body and the expression that they create through not only a character, but, in our everyday lives as well.
And I feel like that makes sense. I never thought about it that way before. And I feel like you also, because you've danced and you've been in theater as a performer, I feel like you understand functionality
Oh, yeah, for
as
sure.
well.
Definitely functionality. Well, and the other interesting thing is that I think ultimately all of these things actually are related to each other. So my my interest in nursing, my interest in medicine in general, my interest in costumes, in the human body, in theater, all have a similar overlap in that they're all exploring the complexities of the human condition and the complexities of what it means to be a person. So in nursing, that's a very practical application of that question. And in theater, it's more of a theoretical, but it's kind of asking the same thing.
Wow, see, I just never thought about this before, but you're right. I mean, there is a lot of crossover with those two things, and it makes sense.
And I'm not the first person who has been like a practitioner of, medicine or a practitioner of nursing to, be in the arts.
Hmm.
I think it's a pretty common overlap. I think a lot of, full-time doctors, have a background in some sort of artistic discipline. One of the most famous playwrights of the 20th century, Anton Chekhov, was a physician as well as a very lauded Russian playwright.
Well, because people aren't just, I mean, aren't just in cliques, right? Always like you talk about in high school, people are, it's not exclusively you're a science person or you're an art person, right? I mean, we're all eclectic people.
Yeah, and we're all like this beautiful complex amalgamation of all of our experiences. And as I mentioned before, capitalism does not want us to embrace that complexity. It wants us to pick a focus because that's how we as a society become cogs in a machine.
Hmm. For sure. And I think that's what this podcast is a little bit about, right? I'm just interviewing people about how they are creative in their daily life, either professionally, just how they live their life in general, because it is human nature and part of life that I don't think everybody gets to tap into.
It is absolutely a privilege to be able to practice or consume art in
It
in
is.
in a lot of ways when many people are focused on survival only.
Oh, for sure. I think a lot of people, like I don't recognize my privilege all the time because I did you familiar the artist way.
Yes.
And I did that group with the museum. And so most of the people part of that group, we worked through that book by Julia Cameron together. And for people not familiar, it's a 12-week course on rediscovering your creativity. Most of the people in that were women, most of them middle-aged, who never got a chance to be creative in their life, whether they were working or mothers and had families and just had a lot going on. And so that was a lot of the stories that they shared. And one woman said that how she almost always wanted to play a musical instrument, but her family couldn't afford it. And so she never was able to do music. Or if you're from a rural area, you might not have access to seeing the arts either and seeing and and hearing different stories. Okay, we are back. So now let's kind of fast forward now to you're graduating, you're entering the real world, and I know that you worked a lot of different jobs. So I don't know if you want to talk about a little bit about kind of the different, kind of maybe like the theater world, like what does the theater workspace look like for artists? And then also your eventual decision to go to grad school.
So immediately upon graduating, I knew that I was going to be going into a specific program that was through the Juilliard School. So at the end of my senior year, well, like midway through my senior year, I applied to a bunch of different apprenticeships at many of them were at regional theaters, and the one I ended up going to was at Juilliard, which is in New York City for people who don't know. And that program was specifically geared at working with people who had a pretty significant amount of experience in costumes, and our role as costume apprentices at Juilliard was to support the operas, the dramas, and the dance productions that were put on, and to support specifically the costume designers who were always guests of the Juilliard School. Essentially, it taught you how to be a professional assistant costume designer or associate costume designer, which is one of the career options that is available to people. You don't always just have to be the designer. I think a lot of people think that there's only, one role, even like if you even do know about like costume design, scenic design, lighting design, in school you're often taught be the costume designer, you can be the scenic designer, you can be the lighting designer, or that's kind of what's pushed. Realistically, if you look at the end of a playbill, there are hundreds of people who are working on any given production, in even many in the costume department. So, you have associate costume designers, you have assistant costume designers, which are two different jobs. You have stitchers, you have drapers, you have, other craft artisans who are the people who make the clothes. In scenery, you have the technical directors who oversee the specific like technical aspects of building a set. They sort of are the people who kind of engineer it in a way. And many, many, many other types of jobs. Production assistants who are essentially the backbone of both theater and the film industry. Doing all of those types of jobs is something that's available to people.
Did you feel like that was a shock as kind of like one of your first big things like out of college of if was it like I said, a completely shock of how differently that you experienced it before? Like you said, first of all, there's so many people.
I don't think it was a shock because the way that our college operated was, you had to fulfill like in costumes, like you had to fulfill all of those roles. So like I knew what the roles were, but I didn't really ever consider doing those roles. Like it was always like, oh, you should be the costume designer. That was what was sort of pushed to us as students. And as I entered the world, I began to meet more and more people who would say things like, oh, I would never want to be the costume designer. Or that was never something that, being the costume designer wasn't interesting to me. Like I always wanted to be a draper. And that was more of what was shocking to me was like, oh, these people knew from an earlier age than me that they wanted to do this really specific thing.
Was that intimidating?
No, but what was intimidating were the people who knew that they wanted to be designers. And I think that was more intimidating to me because I have always also kind of known that I've been more interested in the design aspect as opposed to other aspects. Though I'm also interested and I do enjoy being an assistant and an associate. And I think a lot of my enjoyment from that actually, or my enjoyment of being an assistant slash associate comes from my experience at Juilliard through that specific apprentice program. So the Juilliard program is 1 school year in length. So after that program, I didn't really have a really big plan. I knew that summer that I was going to be working at the Santa Fe Opera, which was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and is a large opera company. And I interned there as stitching and dressing apprentice, which essentially my role was to physically make a lot of the costumes for the operas and to work as a dresser on specific productions, which are dressers are people who work backstage to like physically prepare and dress the actors for performances. After that summer, I didn't really have a plan. I knew I was going to be moving back to New York City. And I just kind of started reaching out to people, which is sort of the only way to make it in an artistic field, whether that's through, networking or through cold calls. And I cold called a lot of Broadway costume shops. And I got a call back from a shop that recently, the owner of the shop, Sarah Timberlake, she retired, but that shop was called Timberlake Studios. And they made a lot of clothes for The Lion King and for the Martha Graham Dance Company, as well as many other, regional theaters. And so that was sort of my day job. And I continued to reach out to different, people that I had met through my time at Juilliard and through my time at the Santa Fe Opera. I sent an email to an associate costume designer who he no longer works in theater actually, but his name is Stephen Rotremel, and he was the associate for Emily Rebels, who was designing at the Santa Fe Opera when I was working there. And I had had some interaction with Stephen a couple of times throughout the summer, as well as Emily. And I sent them an email saying, oh, hey, I'm, around and I'm available for work if you ever need any help. Is basically the thesis of what I said. And he emailed me back and he said, we don't need anyone right now, but I'll keep you in mind. Sometime randomly in like October, so I had been in New York for like back in New York for like 2 months at that point. I got an email saying, you know, that they needed help. And it was from then on, from October of 2017 until August of 2018, that I worked for Emily and her team. Emily Rebels is the costume designer for Dear Evan Hansen, and She was also the costume designer for Jagged Little Pill, which we worked on when it was uh, first in iterations at the American Repertory Theater in Boston. And she has many other Broadway credits. As part of her team, I sort of would just come on to different productions that she was working on, whether they were like regional productions or, productions that were in New York City, and kind of just do whatever they needed, which a lot of the time was returns or working on basic alterations for things or help organizing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is I mean, that is the arts, and that's been my experience in the arts too. It is a lot of networking. It's showing that you are committed and that you have the skill set and that you'll show up, and that means a lot, just those basic things. But I feel like it can also be a difficult thing, I think, to penetrate too, because I've also seen, especially in the theater, people have their people and
Yep,
they just keep using the same people, and it's hard to be a new person trying to get through that sometimes.
absolutely. And that phrase, people have their people, is so applicable in so many instances in the theater. And so the best thing you can do is to unfortunately say yes to as much as you can, which I think is what in many cases, and for me specifically, leads to burnout.
And I'm sorry if this is a stereotype, but my experience also in theater, there's not a lot of boundaries.
Oh, that's not a stereotype. That's just true.
Yeah, how does that work?
No, that doesn't work. It just is. And I don't know as much. I think it's changed a little bit in theater post COVID, and I've worked mostly in TV and film post COVID, so I don't really know as well what a lot of other professionals do specifically right now. But I think that there still is like a very very deep misunderstanding of people's personal time in the theater.
Well, because it's not a 9 to 5, and so people can text you for something at, 11 p.m. because there's no office hours, right? I mean, I feel like it's just go, go, go. And I think that's just kind of how the culture is.
And you're expected to reply at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
And that is something that is like, in my opinion, quite toxic.
So how did you create any boundaries for yourself, or how did you prevent any burnout, or you just let yourself burn?
I just burn out.
Yeah.
I really don't recommend that to anybody.
Yeah.
Um, in the team that I work for now, or that I'm working with right now on this on the dance floor, it's not like that at all. And so for me right now, those are the kinds of shows that I prioritize. Those are the kinds of people I prioritize working with. Are people who essentially are my friends, but also who like respect my time and respect my my me.
Yeah, I mean the environment and the people mean a lot. They definitely make the difference.
And I loved working with all of the people that I worked with in before grad school and after grad school. I think that it's just part of this overall atmosphere that is present in the theater that we're all, myself included, guilty of perpetuating.
I guess this maybe has something to do with it a little bit, is as artists sometimes do, like money is a problem. It's hard to have consistency. I don't know if you struggled with that, but it's hard to say no when you also need to pay bills. So it's easy to say yes to everything and
Right. And then
to make ends meet too.
for me, I was always more afraid that something wouldn't come along next. And so I would always say yes to things because even though I can't think of a time where I had no work. I was freelancing for several years, and I don't know that there was a time where I was unemployed.
And did you have a day job?
No.
Wow, that's good then. That's good.
Well, if you consider my day job working at a Broadway costume shop,
But you were always in your field,
yes.
which is I don't think everyone can say the same. So that's great that you were able to do that. Well, let's talk a little bit about grad school and your decision to kind of enter that. because, and I guess because I know we've talked about this before, I feel like my reason to enter grad school was because I felt like I was at a stopping point in my career and I couldn't make go to the next move. Because for you, this would be going from like what, assistant costume designer to being the designer.
Yeah, I guess that was my goal at the time because I knew that I didn't want to be an assistant in, in the long run, in the long term. And that was primarily what I was doing before grad school. And I also was thinking at the time that I would want to teach because as a person in theater, your terminal degree is the MFA. And so if I had my MFA, I would be able to teach at, the collegiate level. And I was thinking, oh, maybe that's a career pathway that would interest me. And so I applied to three different grad schools and was accepted at two of them and waitlisted at one. And ultimately, I had a really great time in grad school. I learned so much about myself and I learned so much about the people who really make theater happen. And I also learned how I operate as a designer and how I operate as I don't know, a citizen of the world.
So do you feel like it was worth it?
Oh yeah, I would never change my graduate school experience ever.
All right, so now you've graduated grad school with your master's degree. So then I know that you switched, this is at the point where you switched from theater into film. So I guess what made that decision?
My graduate school had a lot of professors who prioritized their film careers. And so, because of those connections in the film industry, I was able to work basically right away in film as opposed to theater. And I knew from having done both theater and film while I was in graduate school that I was more interested in film just because of the details that you can capture and because of the way that it works on a day-to-day basis. And I was quite close to one of my mentors, Mindy Eshelman, who still teaches at Carnegie Mellon. She was originally a film designer, and I think through her mentorship I sort of deepened my love and my interest in film and television. And so actually, while I was still in school, I began working on different TV and film projects, many of which were in Pittsburgh, which is where Carnegie Mellon is. Yeah, so I was working on different projects that were in the Pittsburgh area, mostly just as a day player, which is sort of like a person who comes in and does a job for 12 hours and then leaves. Like you're not really fully part of the production team. You just sort of dabble. And so I, started to get to know different people in the film world in Pittsburgh. And from that, I guess I just started to get offered more jobs. I worked as a production assistant. My first full time job was as a production assistant for a movie called Fire Island, which actually shot in New York. But I met the designer on a project, day playing on a project in Pittsburgh. And that sort of ties back to, the networking, the connections. So I went to New York for that summer to work on Fire Island. And we did that project. And then I came back to Pittsburgh to work on another movie called Rustin. And I got that job through my friend Lindsay, who I went to grad school with. That project was long and drawn out because of some issues with COVID. I worked on that for almost a year before moving on to another project in Pittsburgh called The Deliverance.
I didn't
And
know so many things were shot in Pittsburgh.
yes, they have a very vibrant film community, particularly before COVID happened. And also before they, I think they scaled back some of their tax breaks. So film people will go wherever to shoot if they get a tax break. And Pennsylvania had several laws that provided tax breaks for the big film companies to come film in Pennsylvania.
I feel like I remember you doing this, and I remember, and maybe part of it was kind of post-COVID trauma a little bit, but I remember you getting really burnt out by the film industry and film culture. So I don't know if you want, and that ultimately kind of led you to leave it. So if you could talk a little bit about that decision.
I think that I was actually quite burnt out for a long time and did not know it and didn't want to accept it. Probably before I even went to graduate school.
What are the signs you think you missed?
I think I knew the signs were there. That's the thing. I think I chose to ignore them because, before grad school, I was really nervous. I was like, is this right for me? And it was right for me in many ways. But I think when you have those questions, it's okay to take a step back. You don't have to keep going just because other people are continuing to go. And I think that was always the fear for me, like, oh, if I stop, I'm never going to come back. Like, I'm never going to have another window of opportunity. And so that was always my fear, like, oh, I've had my window of opportunity. I need to keep going. And so that was sort of what kept me going, even through grad school, because so many people that I was close to, my parents, my partner at the time, I talked about quitting grad school like at least once a month. And I did, and I finished. But that was something that for me had been going on for a long time. And I think working the 12-hour days in TV and film, for 5 days a week really added to that.
And then you decided to do nursing. And so we already talked about the little bit of the crossover between those things, but I think some people on the outside might look at that and say like, "Oh, he gave up or he's a sellout or something like that." But then I know you and I have talked personally about how sometimes having stability can actually give you more time to be creative too. So,
Absolutely.
if you could expand on that.
Yeah, I think that in many ways, working in the industry deprived me of a lot of my creativity. Specifically, after the year and a half that I was working after graduating, I didn't really feel creative anymore. Like I was just doing work so that I could live. And that made me really sad. The thing that started as a passion just became something I had to do. And I wasn't really enjoying it anymore. And so that was when I knew, you know, I have to do something else. Because while I was working on all of those film things, I was actually also working on theater projects in New York, like between the film jobs. And it was like I said, it was so much. And so I think that there is something very beautiful and artistic and fulfilling about taking a step back and letting something breathe. When you're working on a painting or even sometimes a finished painting, sometimes the most interesting parts of that painting are the blank spaces. And so allowing yourself in life those blank spaces or allowing yourself to diverge from the path that is expected is what makes life interesting and beautiful. No matter what, if you have a passion for something, you will always find your way back to that thing. We're told so many times in the arts, you have to keep going, you're not going to come back to it. But I think even in the time that I've been working as a nursing tech, I've worked several jobs that are in, the theater space. And I think that's a testament to being able to do more than one thing. And for me, I currently have a much better work life balance than I ever had. Right now, I don't. Like in this exact moment in time, I'm quite busy. But I would say that right now is an exception to the overall stability of my life that I've been able to create in the last, you know, year and a half, 2 years.
You're not less of an artist for it either. And I think that like I said, I think other artists can look at some of that and say, like, stability is like there's something bad about stability. Like, you're not a real artist if you have stability, but I've learned that that's not true. I
Yeah.
love having stability.
I I for me, stability makes me more creative. I'm able to enjoy doing the things that I've always loved when I know that I am going to go back to the same house at the end of the day. And when I know I'm going to have, you know, I know what my job is going to look like in 12 hours.
Hmm.
And I know that I can leave my job at home. I don't have to take it home with me. I think that there are many for many people who work full time in the arts. I think that they maybe just don't mind. And I think that everybody has a different level of tolerance for the amount of uncertainty in their lives. And for me, that tolerance is just a little bit less than someone who is choosing to work full time as an artist.
But I think, yeah, no matter what though, like arts people are passionate people, no
Right?
matter, I guess, what it is. Like for me, I have a stable job and I do arts administration, and I'm constantly thinking about work because for me it's more than a career. It's just like my livelihood. I think it's why I was put on this earth, is to bring art to other people. So, and it doesn't turn off because I feel like it's who I am.
Yeah.
But there's still boundaries that can be made. Like I don't have email on my phone. I don't answer texts or answer things after office hours, like, yeah, things may be on my mind, but it's just boundaries with people or boundaries of how often you're going to work and stuff. But it can be hard to do.
But I think that and maybe that's how people who work full time in the arts in other capacities as well are able to separate out you know their lives. But you see on the trope of on television of the overworked artist who doesn't have any time for their family and doesn't have any time for their social life. To an extent, that's true. The Devil Wears Prada isn't about a fake scenario.
Although I don't know if this is a hot take, and we'll take a break in just a second. I feel like her boyfriend in that movie, I don't think should be that mad at her for trying to
Oh,
explore her career. So I feel
he,
like he gets a little clingy.
he's definitely the villain of that story. That's not true.
Not Meryl Streep.
No.
Well, let's take a quick break and then we'll finish up. All right, we are back with our last thoughts. And so I just want to ask if you have any advice for some creative people out there or theater people entering the field, and if you have any hot takes about the creative field.
Yeah. So my biggest advice to anyone who is looking into an artistic career or who currently works in an artistic career is to prioritize yourself, which sounds selfish, but I mean it in the way that you can't take care of someone else, you can't help anybody else if you aren't taking care of yourself. And that took a really long time for me specifically to learn. Maybe other people don't struggle with that as much, but I know that that was something that I still struggle with. And something that I think is also, and this is a message to just anyone who has ever said, you should not pursue a career in art because it's not a stable career path. Honestly, you should really check what you say because saying those things to people who have a passion for something is extremely discouraging. It's not really going to discourage them ultimately from choosing that thing because they're the arbiter of their own decisions. And also, it's kind of rude.
When it comes from like a stranger, like you don't know me.
Even if it's coming from a family member, like a family member who doesn't fully understand your passion for something is not, I mean, it's obviously it's not supportive, but it's also just not nice.
Did you ever have a family member say anything to you?
I think everyone in my family just didn't they didn't fully understand why I was doing what I was doing. People, like you said, people would say things like, "Oh, why are you doing that? You're so smart." As if like doing a creative field isn't smart.
Right.
This isn't even a hot take because I just think it's true, but I think artists are the leaders of most things in the world.
Yeah, I believe that, obviously. I mean, I'm biased, I guess, but I just, when I look at the creative placemaking that happens in communities and what makes communities great, and I mean, the arts, I mean, of course, affect like the economy and all of like that kind of good stuff. But when I look at like where I work and I see people from all over the community intergenerationally, all different races, all different genders coming together to make art, I feel like that's a very powerful thing that should not be dismissed.
Absolutely. I think it gives power to community in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, and I know that, when you see murals around a city, if you, when you see arts show that people are proud, I think, of where they live
Oh, yeah.
and makes life worth living. Thank you so much.
Of course, I'm so glad that you asked me to be on your show.
I'm very proud of you. Like I say to I think all my guests that have come on.
I'm very proud of you.
Well, thank you. It's just amazing to see, like I said, for all the people I've interviewed and people that I am still going to interview and people that I didn't get to, but are still doing great things. It's just wild that, I mean, I've known you since you were 13,
Yeah.
and it's just amazing to see the progress and passion and their struggles, but it's all been turning out pretty good.
I think the world is biased toward the good.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great place to end.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.